Hi everyone, welcome back to Needed Conversations. This is Ryan and Victoria Cole, and today we are talking about another episode, Expectations versus Reality, the Marriage Edition. What are we talking about today?
Well, we're taking the next two episodes and we are breaking down in this first episode the 7 things you shouldn't expect in marriage, even if it's a good marriage. And then the next episode, we're going to be talking about the 10 things that you should expect from a good marriage. So we're going to be breaking those down one by one, and let us know what you think about them. If there's some that we missed, make sure you comment. If you're on YouTube right now, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell notification so that you're updated anytime this podcast is released or any content that's on our YouTube channel there. So we're excited about this conversation that we're in. We've written extensively on marriage. We have a course for those who are dating, single, and engaged. And also, we've got something in the works for married couples, some form of a marriage retreat / conference. But those details will be coming out in the next couple of weeks and months. But we're excited about offering you these resources for you to have a healthy, thriving marriage. So let's jump right in. What's the first thing that you should not expect in marriage?
Mind reading. I think that's a big one. Even I think during the dating phase, I think you have your rose-colored glasses on, but I think when you jump into marriage and reality kind of sets in, I think that you start kind of thinking to yourself, well, I guess people should assume right away that they should do specific things, but it doesn't happen that way because you come from different upbringings. And so you should not expect people to figure out what's in your head. And that comes to a lot of things. It comes, just day-to-day life. It goes to sexual things, like when you're in the bedroom and talking about, what your preferences are. Also not putting things under the rug or tucking things under the rug for specific preferences. And I think whenever you're first newly married, you're kind of timid and you walk around that. So,
yeah, I think that, and sex is a good example of this. Assumption is never a good building block in marriage. It's like building your house upon the sand. It's going to eventually crumble. Your assumptions are wrong. They say that we live our lives not even through our own reality of the world around us, but we live our lives through what we think someone thinks about us. Not even what they actually think of us, and this goes to the mind reading piece, but what we think they think. And so we're living from all of these assumptions, and a lot of times they're projections. We project upon people the insecurities that we have. And I know that I'm guilty of this too, because you're more introverted, I'm extroverted. We kind of flip roles as far as the stereotypical, men tend to talk less, women tend to talk more. It's kind of opposite with us. But, whenever you have a shutdown mode or you're being silent, especially if we're having some kind of dispute, if you aren't telling me what you think, then I'm filling in the gaps. And that's a constant, tug of war that you and I have with my insecurities, placing thoughts in your head about what I'm thinking that you're thinking. And it's just a mind-numbing experience. And you should never project thoughts into somebody else's head, because you're not in their head, and you have to have the conversations. And if it didn't come from them, from their mouth, then they probably weren't thinking it, and it's probably a projection of your insecurity. Now, on the opposite side of this happens a lot with women. Women expect men to know exactly what they think and sometimes what they need, especially around the house. Victoria and I have had many conversations about tasks, and men are very detailed, task oriented, and they do things in a very regimented kind of way. And it might not be even in your time frame. So if you make a blanket statement like, honey, can you take out the trash? Sure. And I might make up in my mind that that's going to be a couple of hours from now, or maybe it's tomorrow morning, or maybe it's after I finish the project that I'm working on, but maybe you wanted it done right then. for whatever reason, maybe you're cooking and there's no more room left in the trash. And, we're not observing all of those things and we're not reading your mind. And so what I always tell women in particular, like if you want your husband to do something, tell him and then give him a time frame and be very specific. Husband, honey, can you take out the trash now?
Husband, can you do it now?
Husband, can you do it now? Honey, can you take out the trash now? Or honey, can you take out the trash before you go to work? And if he says yes and then he doesn't do it, then that's a different kind of conversation. But most of the time, if you're very direct about it, it's going to happen and it's going to get done within that time frame.
Yeah, and that's one thing that we also addressed even culturally, like different perceptions and viewpoints. So we can be saying the same word, but we have a different meaning in our head. So sometimes we can project on a person what we think this person means by saying this word. So it's always good to reiterate and say, well, what do you mean by that word? Or what does that mean? What does that word mean to you? So that you don't start these disputes and they kind of snowball into this huge argument, and then you're upset at one another because you have to live together. So you have to figure out how to communicate and how to better understand one another. And it's almost like as the years go by, you kind of pick up on their vocabulary and kind of what they say and how they do things and how they process information. So that's where it kind of gets easier because you kind of understand how they see things from their perspective, or at least from past experiences.
Yeah. Even though you've been married for years or you've been around this person for years, you still should never think that you'll be able to mind read. Even if you can predict in certain ways, always verify because you don't want to assume. It could end up in a place, an argument where then you might say things that you don't feel. And it would come out of the emotion. So always clarify. Communication is key. What's number 2?
Number 2 is perfect harmony. And we actually did an episode on this about disputes and the fact that disputes are actually healthy. And I think a lot of us go into marriage just thinking that we're not going to have, any arguments. We're not going to have to deal with any of this. And it's not true. We're both human beings. We come from different backgrounds and we have to fuse together and create something together. So you are going to have times of what we call intense fellowship and hopefully come to an agreement or a compromise of some sort, right?
Yeah, and I don't think you have to have your goal be to agree on everything because you could have 2 different perspectives. And I think that the goal is just having consensus and saying, well, this is how we're going to move forward. And then we come to an agreement. We may not necessarily even fully agree about the fine details of a particular topic, but we can say this is our pathway forward. That's especially true for couples who have a lot of conflict, and really you can get in the weeds of that conflict because it's layering one thing on top of the other, and then before you know it, you don't even know what you're arguing about because what you're arguing about isn't really the root of the issue. And so to weed through all of the dispute, you just have to really come to a consensus about, okay, this is our agreement as to how we're going to move forward in this particular area. But you're never going to have perfect harmony. I think that you have moments where you hit high notes, but then you also have moments where you hit low notes. But you can't define your marriage by the high and the low notes. You have to define your marriage by the entire melody that's produced through your life together.
That's a good way to put it. It's like all the full sheet music, not just a couple of notes here and there.
Sometimes you're going to hit a bad note, and that's okay. Give yourself a little bit of time in between. You'll forget that note ever happened.
Wow.
What's number 3?
Most of us. Number 3 is every need to be met.
Yeah, I think that's extremely important because truly all of your needs are only met through Jesus Christ. And you can't be that person's savior. I think that it's important to communicate certain needs that you have that person can fulfill. But I think when it comes down to it, that's a happiness question. You're looking for that person to fill a void that only Jesus can fill. And so you have to get so lost in God's presence that when you come to your spouse, you're coming to them as a whole vessel. It's never a 50-50 experience. It's always 100-100, and Jesus is the one who fills in all the gaps. And And so all of your needs are not going to be met.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we hear a lot of from people is if they are in a struggle or separation, they say, "Well, I'm just not happy." And that's kind of vague because that could mean so many different things. But at the same time, like you said, if you put a different expectation, an expectation that a human being cannot meet, you're always going to be disappointed. And so you always have to make sure that you filled up. I've even said this recently too. You have to make sure that you get filled up as a person even after you get married. You have children, you have things that you have to worry about. There's going to be a lot of distractions, but you have to make time to make sure that you are self-aware, that you are taking the time to study the Word of God and to pray and to get filled up so that you can pour out to other people.
That's right. All right, the next one, number 4, is unending sexual ecstasy. Now, this could be a whole episode in and of itself, because human sexuality is very complex. And I say that because there's different aspects of our life where our sexual experience with our spouse is going to be different. Let's take, for instance, at different points of hormonal libido and the fact that women most of the time don't hit their sexual peak until they're in their 30s, while men, according to studies, hit their peak more so in their 20s. But that's, again, a general consensus. That may not be true with everyone. And also, you have everything in between as far as pregnancy, how pregnancy affects your sexual experience, learning your body after having a baby.
Postpartum.
And all of that, dealing with the emotions of sex. And then defining what is sexual ecstasy to you, because there is, good sex in terms of like the physicality of it, but then there could be good sex in terms of an emotional connection, which may or may not end with a big O, as they would call it. You would hope that it does. Mm-hmm. And then I think for women in particular, realizing that there's a buildup that takes place. Whereas men, unless you're dealing with a medical condition that you might need treated, normally you're going to get there either way. But women, it's a little bit more of a journey. And that starts not just when you're in the bedroom, but throughout the day. And it's little things that build romance. And it could be something as simple as washing the dishes. And having that build up to a place of quote unquote sexual ecstasy is a lot of work. Work that people aren't willing to put in. And finally, I would say, take control of your own sexual experience with your spouse, not by yourself, with your spouse or with anyone else.
Yeah, but I think just thinking about the other person too, you know what I mean? Like, I think if you're more concerned about what the other person's needs are, I feel like that there can be this beautiful exchange of like that person will want to, make sure that you're satisfied as well. You know what I mean? Like, what do you like? So I think just working together, not just like, well, I don't feel fulfilled. You know what I mean? Working together to talk through it, but also, say what you like, what you don't like, maybe play some kind of a game.
And that's what I mean. Yeah, that's what I mean by taking control of your own sexual experience with your spouse. Communicate your needs.
Yeah.
Don't just, go through, interaction after interaction, walking away unsatisfied, or maybe they're doing something that bothers you or makes you feel uncomfortable. Speak up and let them know that, that's what you're feeling. Okay, we can have a totally different episode, and we will, on sex, because that's a big topic. I think maybe in the summertime, maybe we can do summertime sex or something like that.
Summer quickies or something.
Well, number 5.
There will be no future challenges. I mean, we all know that life is challenging in itself. And I think we have actually come to terms with this even more so in our 30s, because we're like, wow, I thought I was adulting before, but now we're really, really adulting, because now we have like 2 kids. There's so many things going on. We have so many things that we want to accomplish and pour into, and there's just it just feels like there's never enough time in the day. And then just being emotionally, physically draining, there's a lot that comes into play with that. So to go into marriage thinking that you're not going to have those challenges. There's going to be things that you're going to have to work through. You're going to have your children. You're going to have work changes, possibly maybe a loss of a family member. That can change a lot of dynamics in your relationship, and that's something that you have to transition well into. I think you have the whole sermon on transitioning well.
Yeah. I think that challenges are inevitable, but just knowing that when you experience challenges, you have a choice. Either you're going to fight one another or you're going to fight together. And so I think that that's the mindset that you always have to have, is that whatever challenge we're facing is going to be us. And we're going to come together and develop a battle plan to tackle this. And we're both going to put in the work and we're going to do it together. There may be certain challenges where one spouse has to bear some more of a measure of the load than the other. But in general, you're going to equal out the load, and you're going to say, this is our battle plan and this is how we're going to attack these challenges together. And you communicate about it. Because some of the challenges that you face are, more so a challenge that one of you are going to face and not so much the other. But I say this often, even in the dating process. If you're listening to this and you are in the dating world, you want to be able to find somebody that, number one, you're going to be able to bear the burden of their thorn. Paul said, I had a thorn in my flesh. Not sure what that is. It could be a sinful behavior, an addiction, just a personal challenge. And as a spouse, you're going to have to be able to bear that burden. Number two, you're going to have to come to terms with whether or not you have what it takes to bear the burden of their calling, what God has called them to do. And so having that in mind, even in the dating process, will set that expectation to say, there will be challenges, but I already know that I'm in it, and I'm going to do whatever I can with the help of the Holy Spirit to bear with my husband's or my wife's burdens.
That's right.
Number 6.
Never having to say I'm sorry. I think that can be challenging for some people more than others. I would say that's probably me. I think because when you get like in the heat of a moment, it's hard to like think that you're wrong and somebody else is right. But you're going to, co-labor, you're going to live together. So there are going to be disputes, like we said, and disputes are healthy. And so you have to, be gracious and patient with each other, and hopefully work on, maybe if you do have a challenge, saying I'm sorry. And that's something that we say even to the single people, like work on that right now, because, in a marriage, if you struggle with that relationally when you're as a single person, in a marriage, that can be even more challenging, because it's not like you're going to, leave. This is a commitment. So you're going to have to come back. And that can affect a lot of areas of your marriage.
Yeah, that's an interesting term that we've developed in the English language, I'm sorry. It's almost like, when someone does you wrong, you delight in them wallowing in not just defeat, but admitting that I'm a bad person in this area. So when somebody says, I'm sorry, it's like, yeah, you are in that area. Mm-hmm. I don't quite like it, even though I know it's something that we say. It's pretty common. I would rather someone say, I apologize, or I take responsibility for this part. And I think even in marriage, coming together and saying, listen, we both have responsibility to take in every challenge. Sometimes I have more responsibility, and sometimes you bear more responsibility, depending on whose actions precipitated a certain challenge. But I think just admitting that this is the part that I played in hurting you, and I take responsibility for that, and this is my plan of action to change, and so that it doesn't happen again. But even the phrase, I'm sorry, is such a negative, self-defeating, and it's almost a confession, to be honest. It's like saying, this is a negative aspect of myself, and it's probably going to happen again. Instead, you should say, I take responsibility, and this is what I'm going to do to change.
Yeah, that's good. And then number 7 is never being disappointed. Again, like we've said before, that I think you have to put expectations in the right place. And that's not to say that you shouldn't have a standard even in marriage. And again, making sure that you communicate thoroughly, that you don't leave it to mind reading or thoughts circulating in your mind, because the enemy is going to play with you and put in thoughts that your spouse doesn't love you, doesn't care for you, and all those things. And that's not true. So you have to make sure that you place the right expectation on the spouse. And then even when you're let down, go to God, pray and seek God's face. And, maybe there's something that you can help work through with your spouse. Maybe that's something that they're being challenged on as well. So, you are going to be disappointed, but that doesn't mean that you should lower your, standard even when you do get married.
Yeah, I think disappointment stems from a lack of fulfilled terms and agreements within that invisible relational contract, as we like to speak, and take disappointment as, maybe this part of our relationship needs to be renegotiated. This just isn't working. And instead of grumbling and living in the billows of the sorrow of they did me wrong, or they said they were going to do this and they didn't, or they didn't live up to the vows of our marriage, you could just say, this isn't working. But this could work if these things come into alignment. And you address it and you say, listen, especially when it comes to something more serious like adultery, those are firm lines that you have to set. And you're going to say to yourself, how many times will I be mistreated in this way before you have to, make other life choices. But when it comes to some of the smaller nuances of disappointment within a marriage, just saying, this is not working. Whether it be who's taking the kids to school, or who's making dinner every night, or who's cleaning up afterwards. Just being, I'm disappointed because I'm bearing, what you're really saying is, I'm bearing more of the load than I feel like that I should. Mm-hmm. And you're saying, this is unfair, unbalanced, disappointed. This is unbalanced. Let's balance the scales a little bit. What can I take off of my plate because this isn't working? And if you don't address what isn't working and create a plan to move forward, you're going to find yourself up in the face of disappointment again and again. And disappointment is going to turn into disheartened. And then being disheartened is going to turn into a hardened heart. And that hardened heart is going to lead to a divorce.
Yes.
Bottom line. Mm-hmm. So these are the things that you should not expect in marriage. You should not expect your spouse to be a mind reader. You should not expect perfect harmony, or every need to be met, or unending sexual ecstasy, or a marriage without challenges, or never having to admit responsibility with a wrongdoing. And you should never expect not to be disappointed. Mm-hmm. Disappointment's going to happen. What you do with it is all up to you. This has been fun.
Yeah, it's been awesome. And you know what? If you're a single person, I hope you're taking some notes.
That's
and
right.
If you are a married person and you're struggling with any of those things, and maybe stepped into marriage and you still kind of feel like you're going over that hurdle, we just pray that you find a strategy, you get together with your spouse and work that issue out. So that you can, work together for a common mission and a common purpose to achieve whatever God has put on your hearts to fulfill, without having to deal with these little minor things that can become really huge and affect your marriage.
No relationship ever really starts out bad unless it's truly dysfunctional and both of you are broken individuals, which can happen. But the majority of the time, whenever these challenges in your marriage occurs, it's an indication that you guys have shifted in terms of your season. You've transitioned in your life in some way. And if you were to assess things, you could say, well, I could trace it back to when I changed careers, or when I started going to school, or when we had the baby, or when we lost a child. You can always trace it back to these transitional moments. And that's why my book, I Love You More, Most, and Forever, is a guide not just for dating, but for those who are married too, to say in these transitional moments, we have to go back to the outer court and address some of the spiritual challenges of our marriage, and then go into the inner court and address more of the issues of our soul. We're different people in this different season since I've become a parent, or since I've been promoted, or since I've started going to school. I'm different, and so we have to renegotiate again the terms of agreement, because every marriage has them. But this is really good for you to look at, especially if you are single as well, not just if you're married, but just what to look out for, that you're stepping into a marriage with the right expectations, because reality can come hitting you in the face really, really hard. But we hope you enjoyed this episode. If you would, make sure you're subscribed. Rate this podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you're on YouTube, make sure to comment. Let us know about what you think of these 7 things that we listed out that you should not expect from marriage. And again, if we missed anything, make sure you let us know, and we'll include it in a future episode. Again, next week we're going to be talking about the 10 things that you should put on your expectation list in marriage. So make sure to check that out next Monday, which is when we release our podcast. But until then, this has been Needed Conversations.